So welcome to one of the last lectures on machine translation or statistical machine translation, and these days neural machine translation, obviously. And today we're going to talk about multilingual machine translation. That may sound a little bit strange at the first sight, because machine translation by itself already involves at least two languages. So the question is why more than two languages would be helpful? And that's exactly what we are going to cover today. So today, so the clicker doesn't work, yes. So today, we're going to talk about using more than two languages in the setup, and we'll first motivate for that, and then we'll talk about transfer learning, which is a setup where you want to use these more languages only in the preparation phase. And in the end, when the system is running, you are actually interested in only one language pair, the language pair that you somehow focus on, and all the other languages are just auxiliary data that you want to use. So that's transfer setup, and then we will move to setup which is truly multilingual, where you want the system to perform on multiple languages at the same time. Very well. So you need to preserve the training, the translation quality of all the languages involved. And the last bit of the lecture will be devoted to systems which are, so to say, massively multilingual, and there you have many languages, dozens of languages in one system present. And that obviously brings new challenges. Some of these slides are based on the slides by my PhD student who has recently successfully defended Cosmic, and other slides are also based on colleagues from Edinburgh or Zurich, Rico-centric, and other models. So now let's talk about the motivation for multilingual machine translation. For many languages, there is not enough parallel data. If you are translating from German into English, then obviously many texts have been previously translated. But if you are native of an Indian state and you want to translate from Odia to English, or across many of the Indian languages from Odia to Marathi, then there would not be so many parallel texts, and maybe there would not be available digitized text at all. So there are many languages which are so-called low resource. On the Earth, there is about 7,000 languages, and only a handful of those have sufficient resources for training a good performing machine translation system. So people, when they learn languages, the more languages they learn, the easier they learn further languages, because the words become similar. You will know how to, what would be the word stem in Romance languages or Germanic languages. To some extent, languages from the same family would be even mutually understandable. So there's obviously some benefit if you know more languages and if you know related languages, because the grammatical construction and the vocabulary size will be shared. So the idea is that automatic systems should be also able to exploit this language similarity. This kind of motivation is related only to the fact that you want to learn the other languages and then focus on the one task at hand that you want to perform in. But sometimes you can also have a setting where the same document is already available in multiple languages, and you want to provide yet another translation of that. And a good example would be translations from English into most of other Indo-European languages. English is quite poor in terms of morphology, but if you already have that text translated into French, for example, you will know the gender of various things, and you will also know the cases, because the grammatical structure will be to some extent comparable across languages. So if English does not mark words for subject or object, other languages will. And if you have this other translation available already, then you can use this additional information from French and produce the Czech or German translation easier. So that is the second motivation, the improving of translation quality if your text comes in multiple languages and you are adding further languages. And then there are many truly multilingual environments. So the United Nations, they have 6 official languages. Then the European Union has 24 official languages. We are working on a project for the Supreme Audit Institutions, and they have this international group which is called Euroside, and the members of Euroside, the countries and other bodies, in total they have 43 official languages. That's just the European area, and there is also the Interside where there are further languages needed. So in these environments, you would really like to provide translations into all these languages, and building independent models for each of these would be very time-consuming, and it would also consume a lot of resources at runtime, and the stored models would be big. So there is a good need to reduce the computational resources by putting more languages into one model. So let's look at the first setup that I mentioned, the transfer learning. In transfer learning, the goal is to improve the translation quality in one target, or well, let's call it child language pair, and we can reuse data for other languages. And the transfer learning is a technique known from neural networks in general. So it's not limited to machine translation, obviously. And the motivation in transfer learning is that if you have the training curve for your task, this is the typical training curve for neural machine translation systems, where you do not see any overfitting. This is like a well-regularized model, and the training data is sufficient, so you don't see any degradation of the performance as the training process progresses. The performance on the development grows and then stays stable, but you cannot easily increase it any higher. So this will be the performance in the task of interest. If we somehow, in a clever way, put in the additional data from the other tasks, from the other language, then we would hope for this better curve, the curve with transfer learning. And there can be even 3 places where the improvements can appear. At the beginning, the initial performance could be better. It could learn faster, and also, and that's the most important part, the final performance should be better. These curves are really based on experiments with transfer of neural machine translation system. I forgot what language pairs are behind this, but it actually helps, it works. So now how to do that? How to achieve this transfer learning? Let's talk about the simplest technique that proved to be already successful. So you have some, so to say, parent corpus, parent language pair, and you train your system on that until convergence. And then you have the language pair of interest, which is called the child. And on the child dataset, normally you would have this orange curve, the performance on the orange curve, and that already shows some little bit of overfitting. So the training data for the child is maybe very small, so the model memorizes that data too much, and it does not then generalize well and perform well on the adult set. So that would be the baseline, the orange one. But if you initialize this child model not with random weights, as is the normal case, but if you simply continue training with the model as it was prepared, as it was trained on the parent language pair, then you can get this transfer learning effect. You can get rid of the degradation due to the overfitting, and you get the better performance. So this is really the setup. It's as simple as I just put it. You train for a while until convergence on the parent parallel data, and then you switch over. You just start showing the sentences from the intended child data set. There's one concept or one warning that I have to say at this point. Neural network excel at overfitting. So they are very quick learners. As soon as you change the content of your training batches, the models will adapt and they will happily forget what has been learned in the past. They learn in a different way than humans. We as humans accumulate the knowledge. But neural networks, the way they are trained these days, they will really try to overfit to the most recent batches. So here is an illustration of the phenomenon. The phenomenon is called catastrophic forgetting. Again, we have the baseline, some machine translation system, which is learning on a big English Czech corpus. And we thought that that was our experiment with like helping the model to learn better in a way similar to humans. Maybe let's show the models. Let's show in train data. Let's first show some easy sentences, and if the model learns well on the easy sentences, then it would like understand better the more complex sentences. So hopefully, with this curriculum style of learning, with clever organization of the training data, we would get to better performance. So in these experiments, we've seen how horrible the catastrophic forgetting can be. So when we said, okay, simple sentences are probably short, let's just sort the corpus from the shortest to the longest sentences. And when we trained the system using this sorted corpus, it's not alphabetically sorted, but it starts with, there's still some repetitions in the corpus, it starts with very like similar sentences and boring sentences in a way. So when the network is trained on data which is not random, then it fails to learn in the final task. So training on the sorted corpus in whatever way you sort it is always a very bad idea. What you should always do is to randomize the data. And then the network will, each of the batches will illustrate well enough where the optimum of the parameters is and where the training should move in the next step. So we wanted to achieve this curriculum learning. We wanted to give the model first the easy sentences and then the hard sentences, but sorting it straight away doesn't work. So what we did was to organize the sentences into batches. And these batches are like big chunks. And these big chunks were limited in sentence length. So first we had this batch of very short sentences up to 5 words, and the model learned some more. And then we we exposed the model also to the longer sentences. So we allowed sentences of length up to 10. And then we allowed sentences of length up to 15. And then in the end, we allowed sentences of all lengths. So at this end of the training, which by the way indeed improved the baseline a little bit. So there is something to this curriculum learning. In the end of the training, the model was seeing all the sentences of all lengths, and it was slightly skewed to the longer sentences. The important fact was that the batches were still fully diverse. And then Tom Gosme had this strange idea to just flip the order of this sorted batched corpus. So when we took this very same corpus, organized in these like big chunks of sentences of varying length, we got this learning curve. So at the beginning, the system was learning on all sentence lengths, and the performance seemed better than the baseline. This could be an artifact of the oversampling of longer sentences. So in one training step, you see actually more words. This reflects the number of sentences processed, but in the same number of sentences, with this bucketing, we have longer sentences, so more words. So the better performance at the beginning is probably due to this effect, but then the interesting observation is that as we were closing the buckets, as we were prohibiting sentences beyond certain length, the model actually unlearned to produce long sentences. So this is catastrophic forgetting. At the end of the training, the system was able to produce only very short sentences. It produced sentences as long as the last batch was, not as long as the source sentence is. So the model, and you can check in the paper whether this is still the recurrent sequence-to-sequence model or whether we tested it also for a transformer. This model memorizes the length of the sentences, kind of, and it does not memorize the relation between the source sentence length and the target sentence length. And it unlearns to produce long sentences. So when you want to fit many language pairs, you have to be careful. And we will touch upon this challenge a little later. So now back to the transfer learning task. The early works focused on the setup where we have one language in common, and that was usually the English, and also the languages were always related in the early experiments. So we experimented with something which included also very unrelated language pairs, and we had this idea of trivial transfer, simply train on the parent language pair, and then switch the data set to the child language pair, and don't change any of the parameters or hyperparameters of the training at all. One thing that has to be taken into account is the vocabulary size and the subword vocabularies. So if you have a parent corpus which is typically big and the child corpus which is typically small, then if you would extract the subword dictionary from these two corpora together, then the subword dictionary would be heavily overfit to the parent. So what we do, what we better was to balance the vocabulary in that way that we subsampled from the parent corpus to have the corpora of the same sizes, and then we extracted this subword vocabulary, and that contained all the languages in question. So maybe English was oversampled because it appeared twice in both parent and child, but Czech and Estonian, which was the child language here, that one was equally represented in the vocabulary. Okay, so now for the results. We have now the first results are when transferring the knowledge to the language which is related. So we want to work with Slovak translation, so it's always better with English, Slovak into English, and Slovak from English. And the parent model is our large English-Czech model. So the corpus size difference is actually ninefold. We have 9 times more, back then we had 9 times more data for Czech English than we had for English Slovak. And there is some baseline performance. Obviously, the blast scores when going into different languages are not comparable between each other. They are only comparable within the particular translation direction. So what we observe is the difference of the blast scores when the model is trained on the child language pair only, or whether it is first trained on the parent and then the training continues on the child. And you see that when translating from English, we get some improvement, and when we translate into English, we get a bigger improvement. And there the reason is probably that the additional English data directly help in the language model of the in the decoder in the child model. So the decoder really benefits directly from the parent training data. In the setup where you go from English, the encoder knows English better, but it doesn't help it too much to improve producing Slovak, because Slovak is obviously different than Czech. This is another experiment with Estonian. There, the parent languages were Finnish, Russian, and Czech again. They differed in the magnitude of corpus sizes. So Finnish was 3.5 times bigger than Estonian, and it is the related language. Finnish and Estonian are closely related. When you look at these scores, from the related language, we get some improvement. From Russian, which is larger, we get a bigger improvement, and we get the biggest improvement from the Czech, which is totally unrelated. And actually we get the improvement when we are going from English. So that's the setup tested here. One thing that I would like to highlight is that Russian is written in another script, and still including Russian in the process as part of the parent training data, we do get this big improvement. So the conclusion from this experiment is that it's not too important how related the parent and child language pairs are, but it's important that the parent is big. And if the parent is big, then you will get a good performance of the child with the trivial transfer. Let's try the converse. Let's try to transfer some knowledge. Let's try to bring some knowledge from a low resource parent to a larger child. And so when we tested this on Finnish, so we're now pre-training on Estonian English, and we were moving to the child where the Finnish and English were the language pair of interest. And we also did the same thing for Czech and Slovak. So again, Slovak served as the parent, and Czech was then the target language. So the corpus size difference was below 1. The parent was smaller. We always got like not good results, and even a significant degradation of translation quality. So in our experiments, it confirmed that the parent size, the size of the training data for the parent, is the most important aspect. And if the parent language pair is smaller, then it is going to harm the performance of the child. So it's not a good idea to pre-train with a small parent. The previous experiments, the experiments so far, always had English on the same side. So if the English was on the source side, then the encoder learned better or like the encoder was sent in the pre-train for English, and the same English encoder was useful for the child. If it was the target side, then the decoder knew the English well, and it was again used in the child on the same side. But we also tried to swap the position of English. So now the parent has it's always some language with English, but the English is on the other side in the parent than it is on the child. So, for example, this experiment, the parent model is English into Finnish, and the child model is Estonian into English. And there, the system cannot really reuse the knowledge of encoder or decoder. The thing that helps is the shared vocabulary, obviously. So there is some gain from the English being one of the common languages. And even with this English position swap, we do get the improvement. So the code delta says that yes, it was better to use the transfer setup. Note that it's always the case when the parent was bigger, so we didn't attempt the smaller parent anymore because we knew that it doesn't help. And there is some improvement. The improvements were bigger when the parent had the English on the correct side, but the difference is not too big, or well, it is big, but we still get an improvement over the baseline with even when the parent model has English on the wrong side. And now a setup where there is no language in common. And here the test set, the child that we are trying to achieve is Estonian into English translation, and we train on corpora like Arabic Russian, or Spanish French, or Spanish Russian, or French Russian. These all come from the UN corpus, so they are on the same size. And they are both times bigger than the intended child. And the interesting observation is that in all cases, we do get an improvement again. It's not as big as before, so there is no language in common, no vocabulary can be reused, the shared vocabulary does not get any benefit from like including Spanish and French words for Estonian English translation, but there is some improvement. And here I would again like to highlight the properties. We got the half-lead, so that's the non-significant improvement, and all the others are significant. We got a non-significant improvement for pre-training on a language pair which doesn't share the script at all. We were training on the Arabic script into Cyrillic script, and that was supposed to help in Latin Estonian into Latin English, and help a little. For the other setups, the improvement was significant, and yet the target language was Cyrillic, so in an alphabet which is totally irrelevant to English. So here's a summary of or summary illustrating that the performance of the parent is also important. So it's not just the size of the training data of the parent, but also its overall performance. If you start the child from the parent, when the parent is fully converged, you will get the best performance. If you stop training the parent prematurely and switch to the child too soon, the performance of the parent is worse, and so is the performance of the child. So the better the parent, the more trained it is, the better the training it is, the better for the child. Here is a simulated, very small setup, very low resource setup. We are again translating into, I think, English Estonian, and going from English Finnish, the related language. And as we reduce the child data size, the performance of the baseline model, which is the blue bars, will decrease horribly. With just 10,000 sentence pairs, you cannot expect any good performance. So the blast score is just close to 2 points. But if you use this very small parent model, the 10,000 English Estonian language pairs, sentence pairs, if you use this to continue training on the parent, which is already well trained English Finnish model, you will get 10 black points increase. So for very low settings, the transfer learning is very useful. That again illustrates that the bigger the difference in training data sizes between the child and parent, the bigger the gain you can expect. So why did it help? Well, we don't really know what is behind this success. There is the intuition that language is a similar structure, and so we were trying some of these, but this analysis should be deepened a little. We were checking the vocabulary size, and we were checking the scores. So one thing that we noticed is that the child produced longer outputs. So the BLES score, which we use as our evaluation measure, strike a lower brevity penalty. So that is already a little benefit. But it was not the only benefit. It was not just that the child would produce long enough sentences to score well. The child also had good words, better words. And then when we looked at these words, we saw that the setup where the child learned some new words that the parent previously didn't have and the baseline model didn't have, there was about 10% of such tokens in the output. And these 10% of tokens, when we looked at them, we were expecting to see words which would come from the parent language. So maybe some names that do not change the spelling, or some numbers that the system would really copy over from the parent. And that was not the case. So the better translated tokens, the better produced words, were regular Estonian words, no named entities. So the model got some improvement in overall sentence structure. We don't speak Estonian, so we couldn't really assess that, but it was regular Estonian words. Here is an illustration of that in another way. The vocabulary, this is the overlap of the vocabularies. So our main focus was English into Estonian translation, and we've added the English-Russian parent. And because of the different script, because Russian is written in Cyrillic and Estonian is written in Latin, there is actually no words, no support units that would come to the child model from the parent. So there is no lexical gain. Could there be the sentence structure gain? So we didn't go as far to study the sentence structure, we just studied sentence length. So this is a slide that also confirms what I was telling you before about the neural machine translation system memorizing the sentence length. Here we have the parent model. So this is again English to Czech translation. And when we try with the parent model, we subsample it, we select only sentences of a certain length, and we train the parent with sentences only within some range of number of words. And we evaluate on the normal like fixed size and full range of lengths test corpus. So when we look at the performance of the parent alone on the parent test set, then if we train on short sentences only, then the blend score will be very low, and the actual outputs of the system for the test set will be very short, at most 10, or on average 10 words. So actually the outputs are somewhat longer than what the training data was, but they don't go as far as needed. If we trained on everything and the performance was the best possible of this corpus, then the average number of output words would be 15, and we are only at 10. If you train only on longer sentences than the average, if you train on sentences with 20 to 40 words, then the blend score is actually also low, much lower than the baseline, because the system will produce too long sentences, too long outputs. Actually much longer, 5 words or 6, 7 words longer on average than what the best performance would do. And with these long sentences, long outputs, many of these words are obviously not confirmed by the reference, so the blend score decreases. So with too short output, the system is penalized on brevity penalty. With too long outputs, the system is penalized on the precision of n-grams. So now we have these different parents. These parents know only how to produce sentences of certain length, and they tend to be too short or too long, depending which parent it was. And we use these parents to continue training on the child setup. And there we see that if we use the full, the normal, unconstrained parent, the improvement or the baseline performance would be 19. That's the good transfer learning. It has helped somewhat. I forgot what is the child alone performance. And the average length is 15.4. Well, some length that relates well to the particular test set. And the parents which are constrained to produce only sentences either too short or too long, these parents help less. So indeed there is some degradation in the transfer learning, but the average length is okay. So the child data, despite being rather small, allows the model to unlearn the length limitation that the parent had. So the length is good, but the blend score does not benefit that. You don't see that much benefit in the blend score from these constrained parents. Yeah, so this was just to highlight the baseline transfer, the trivial transfer that we've discussed so far. So now let's move to the multilingual machine translation. Here there are many possible configurations. So let's agree on some terminology. Something which is very old, an old idea and well tested is called pivot translation or cascading. There you build two separate systems. So if you want to translate from between some lower resource languages, then you can go over some high resource languages. So for example, when translating between Czech and German, you could go from Czech into English and then from English into German, because Czech and English and German English would have obviously more data available. So the middle language is called the pivot language, and that was tested with the previous generations of machine translation systems as well. Sometimes it's also called cascading, because you're like putting the systems in a cascade. This pivot translation is also used by interpreters when they are sitting in the booth. They call it pivoting. So they are translating from, so they are interpreting, one interpreter goes into some intermediate language, and this is further interpreted by the other language. And it was also used in the past, or it is used when you are translating into many languages. you will first translate, for example, from English into Czech, and then you will translate this Czech into Slovak, because Slovak and Czech are similar, and it's faster and easier to translate between related languages than between unrelated languages, even for humans. So that's why this pivoting or piloting in the spoken domain can be beneficial. But in the pivot translation, there is only one language pair of interest. What you can do is you can work on a system which happily digests various source languages, and this would be called multilingual source side. And sometimes it's referred to as multi-way, because in the same setup you would like to be able to process Czech to English, and German to English, and French to English. So this any two English setup would be a multilingual on the source side. Then you can have a setup which is multilingual and multi-source, and that highlights that you are expecting to have multiple inputs at the same time. And you can do the same setup on the target side. So either you are training your system to be able to produce many target languages, or you are expecting it to produce many target languages at once. So there will be multilingual, multi-target. And then you can go for both sides, multilingual, and you can obviously go for both sides, multilingual and multi-source and multi-target. There is one more term which is good to know, that's called zero-shot training. So in zero-shot training, when you have the system which can digest different languages and it can produce different languages, can we also use it to translate a pair that it never saw as a pair in the training data? So that's a zero-shot. The source language was included among the sources, the target was included among the targets, but the pair of the two languages was never there. And beyond zero-shot is when you expect the system to translate into a language which it hasn't seen at all, or from a language that it hasn't seen at all. Here is some illustrations with pictures. So multi-target and multi-source are interesting for these different reasons. In multi-target focus, you would focus on efficiency. So when you're translating into many different languages at once, because this is a multinational institution and you need to cater for audience who speak very diverse set of languages, you would ideally train just one system and run it like once, and it would emit in parallel on GPU all these target languages at once. So that would be beneficial, and that's what we are trying. How many languages, target languages, can you put into the model so that you don't decrease the performance too much? The multi-source setup is when that's what I already highlighted. Here is an example. I've talked about the morphological information which is available in the additional languages. Here the example is in the lexical domain. So when you're translating the German word Schloss to French, it would be easier if you already had a translation into English, and this translation in English would have already disambiguated whether this is a castle or a lock. So the word Schloss is ambiguous. In French, you have to make a choice, either it is a castle or it is the lock. And if someone did this ambiguation for you, then you already can pick up this information from the English. And when you're training these setups, it is important to realize that there is different data sets available. Some data sets are really multi-parallel, so we have the same sentences across all the languages, such as the UN corpus, and sometimes you have only like pairwise parallel corpora. So it's multilingual, you have many languages, but you have only pairs. And this is the data set which is much easier to obtain than this multiple corpus, obviously. And the ideal setup would be this flexible multilingual machine translation system. It would be one neural network where you could ask for many target languages at once, and you could provide one or many of possible sources, and it would translate from whatever set of inputs you have into whatever set of outputs you like. The idea of multi-source translation is actually pretty old. Already with word-based and phrase-based system, it was tested, and it was tested on many types of models, but it was difficult to reuse the knowledge from the languages because there are very strong independence assumptions in these models, and we've discussed them in previous lectures. So usually it was done by translating from the different source languages into the target and obtaining multiple target candidates, and then some system combination technique was used. So then you had all candidate translations already in the target language, and you were either choosing among those, or you were somehow cleverly mixing the words from these different candidates. And that complicates the translation. And essentially, what we are after is in neural machine translation. The very underlying principle is that the neural machine translation system is a conditional language model. It is conditioned on the source sentence as a whole. And now we want to condition it on more source sentences. So it's not too complicated. The neural network style of translation lends itself much easier to including additional sources. So the first setup was by Zoltan and I, and it directly learned to produce English from French and German sources. And the way it was done was that these recurrent neural networks they were deep, by the way, so it was a deep recurrent neural network. The French one processed the sentence into a single vector that represented the whole meaning of the sentence in French. The same was done by the German decoder, and then these two decoders, the outputs of these two decoders, were put together either by summation or averaging or whatever. And these joint representation, French-German representation of the sentence, were used as the source for the decoder. And the decoder was conditioned on both the source languages, and it produced hopefully better outputs. So the main problem of the setup is that you really need a multiple corpus, or it is better if you have it, because you have to feed the decoder with the combined information. So you need to process the source language 1 and source language 2, and then put these vectors together. Orhan in two papers in 2016 did an experiment with corpora that are not multiparallel but only bilingual and bilingual across many pairs. And the main question was what to do with attention there. He was trying to train N encoders and N decoders, so multiple, not only multiple source size, but also multiple target size. And the question was what to do with the attention. As you know, the attention walks across the positions in the source language whenever you are producing the target output. So whenever you're producing the one word at a time. And the idea is that you will simply share this attention across all the encoders and decoders. So the attention mechanism is just the same, and depending on which language pair you have at hand, you will train the respective encoder and decoder, but you will keep training the same attention mechanism across the languages. And the system was tested again in a simulated low resource setting. So this simulation means that you are actually using high resource languages and you artificially reduce the data sizes for them. And yes, there were improvements compared to the baseline, especially if the training data is rather small. So the more languages you had, the better the performance. But there was experiments that went generally into English. So here is a summary of the performances with French, Czech, German, Russian, and Finnish, always into English and from English. That's the second column within each of the languages. And as highlighted in bold, hopefully you see it on the slides, in the test set of the blend score, this is the loss, the log probabilities. But if we focus on the tested blend scores, then we will clearly see this like interleave pattern. When going into English, it is better to use the multilingual model, and we're going into the other language, like from English into French or into Czech or into German, then we always have a better performance with the single pair models. So the additional languages do not help there. That means that here the benefit was really restricted to the knowledge in the decoder that got maybe extra words in this other language data, but it was not beneficial for producing the other language. Yeah. So these papers also included an interesting experiment that went from the single source but multi-language setup into multi-source multi-language. So you train on pairs of sentences, you don't have multiple corpus, and then you suddenly want to use these encoders and decoders to process sentence which is already available in more languages. And here, what you can do is you can simply use these two encoders at once and just combine the context vectors, so the result after applying attention. You can just combine them together and have the decoder process this joint knowledge. And either you can do this averaging of context vectors, and then based on this improved context vector, generate the output words, or you can this context vector then also is processed by the decoder and helps the decoder to modify its state. Or you can do this prediction of the best word later. You can run the decoders separately for the two languages, and each of the source languages will offer some word, and you can then choose. So only the softmax layer is doing the choice. You can choose the word by voting between the two independent processing setups. So in any case, it is possible to train independent encoders and decoders for each of the language pairs, and then put these network pieces together to process input which has both source information, pieces of information at hand. Okay, so what were the results? This is the multi-way and multi-source setup. It is training on independent pairwise corpora across many languages, and so it's and you are translating from Spanish into English and or from French into English. And you have either a model which is trained only on the Spanish-English data, that's the single language model, or you have a model which is trained, which has also which has seen the encoders and decoders from the other languages in the collection, and these models perform better when translating into English. So the Spanish-English system got some gain by seeing the other language data compared to the baseline, which didn't see the other language data. When we reverse the direction, we see again the sad picture. The other language data is not helping the production of Spanish, So the baseline using just the English-Spanish data is better for the other direction. So this is the setup where we have only single input sentence, and then we are moving towards the setup where we have two input sentences, one in Spanish and one in French, and we are translating into English. And we are using either this late averaging or this early averaging of the knowledge that comes from the source language. And the baseline is to use just, well, the baseline is probably 32. And the short message is that the early averaging and late averaging, each of them helps. Well, early averaging alone is worse than the baseline, but the late averaging is a little bit better, and the combination of using both, of using the information from the source languages at the same time is the best setup. Yeah. So that was the idea of trying to improve translation into a particular language pair by including additional languages, and it was different from the transfer learning setup in that these systems should achieve also a good performance on all the language pairs of interest. In transfer learning, the focus was only on the target language, the child language pair, and the performance of the parent after the fine-tuning or continued training on the child was not important. So maintaining the performance on the other languages is what complicates the possible gains, and we saw that we got the gains across the many setups only in the case where the target language was shared. And when target languages were distinct, then it was better to train the independent systems. But still, these multilingual systems are interesting for the zero-shot translation. So imagine that you have two parallel corpora, Spanish-English and English-French, and you would like to translate between Spanish and French. So one way to do it would be to train independent systems and explicitly go via English, but that is like 2 steps, so it takes twice the time, and there can be very easily some information loss because you need to pick the wording. You have to resolve the ambiguities when translating into English, and then you have to resolve the ambiguities again. So the pivot translation is kind of suboptimal, and also we have this idea of the multi-way encoder-decoder system that can know both pairs within one model. So can we use this model for a zero-shot training? So we know that the encoders were trained on Spanish and the decoders were trained on French, but they were never paired together. So what happens if we run this system for translation from Spanish into French directly? And we do not run it twice. We can run it twice. We can run the same system twice, feed it with Spanish, obtain English, and then take the same system and feed it with this intermediate English and obtain the final French. So that is pivoting with a multilingual system. But the zero shot is different. The zero shot is that you directly add the system to produce the French output. So here is here the scores. Unfortunately, if you do not do the pivoting, then the performance on the def and test sets are just horrible. So if you imagine the structure of the network, you have this shared component of attention, you have the multiple encoders, and you have the multiple decoders. and they were trained so that the Spanish decoder was always trained with the Spanish encoder was always trained with the English decoder, and the French and the English encoder was always trained with the French decoder, and then you try to you try to use the attention in a way in which it was never used. It doesn't work at all. What we obtained only is a neural network which can do two tasks, but there is no sharing of information. These two tasks are mutually independent, and you cannot take one part of the network and combine it with the other end, the never used end, and expect the performance. This didn't happen. If we use the two paths of the network, the Spanish to English and then English to French, in the way they were trained for, so with the explicit pivoting, it works. You get reasonable performance. So the zero shot does not work. But would it be possible to train the missing part, to add the few missing links kind of in the network by fine-tuning on a small amount of parallel data between Spanish and French? So now the question is, where do we get this data on this? So we could get this data with back translation. So we have this original parallel corpora, we have this Spanish-English, and we have the English-French corpus, and we have used these to train the paths in the multi-way, multi-source, multi-target, multi-way system. But now we can take the English-French corpus and we can use this Spanish-English system to produce some synthetic Spanish. And this is already something which can be treated as a parallel corpus. It is synthetic parallel corpus. We will have pairs of sentences that are in French and Spanish. And we can take the network as we have it with two encoders, two decoders. They were trained in the two pairs but never across. And now we will continue training, we will fine-tune with these data that go across. They go from Spanish into French. So what will the results be? If we use pivoting and no fine-tuning, then the scores are around 20, so it performs reasonably well. Then if we use the synthetic parallel corpus, the pseudo parallel corpus, then depending on its size, the blast score can go up to 70, so it is worse than the pivoting. And it has to use 1 million of synthetic sentence pairs. And if this pseudo parallel corpus is very small, then this would not be sufficient to train the network to like create the missing links. The encoder is probably good, the decoder is probably good, but they do not know how to talk to each other, and they will start talking to each other only after of 1 million sentence pairs if they are synthetic. And if we use the true parallel corpus, then we get towards the performance of the explicit pivoting setup, or maybe slightly above, slightly below that, but not much. So we can reach the performance, but we need true parallel data. And unfortunately, if we have these single pair baseline modules and we use 1 million sentence pairs, we will get a better performance even with this sampling. So this is a negative result in a way. Having separate encoders and separate decoders and trying to use new language pairs, test these encoders and decoders across the setup, we will not get any better, even with this fine-tuning, where we would get with a reasonably big true parallel corpus. If the true parallel corpus was rather small, like 100,000 sentences, then the performance of the baseline would be worse than this. But this is something that we have already seen in a way, and I think that the trivial transfer learning that we discussed previously would give us equally big improvements. Yeah. So let's do something simpler. And the simple thing is we will use just the same encoder and just the same decoder, and we will train this system to do many translations at once. For the encoder part, we can simply feed all the many languages, and the encoder will learn how to, like, it will learn automatically what is the current input sentence, what language it is in, and it would learn to produce the target sentence regardless of the source was. So making a system multilingual on the source side is very easy. You just mix in all the source languages into your training data, and that's it. But for the target side, you need to specify what you would like the system to produce. And this is done with the so-called language token. So the source sentence will be now extended. The source sentence will now will include one more token. It can be at the beginning, at the end, or maybe both sides. And this token will be a special request. I'm giving you now the German sentence, but I would like you to translate it into English. So this token 2en means that now you are getting some input. You will know, you recognize the language by yourself, but I want you to produce the translation in English. And then the expected target in your file corpus will be in the English. And then the next item in the batch, or the next item in the training corpus will be another sentence pair from another language pair, and it would be an English source. And now the request would be to translate into Dutch. So the token would indicate, well, whatever the language is of this input string, I want you to produce Dutch. And then the expected output that the model is trained on with backpropagation, as we've discussed it in the past, the expected sentence will be in Dutch. So with this way, we have a model of a fixed number of parameters. We have not changed the structure at all. We have only used one more artificial token to indicate which language we want as the output. And hopefully the system will, like, for free, benefit from the similarity between the languages. If there are some named entities, yes, they can be directly copied in many situations. And the only thing that is here is the risk of catastrophic forgetting. So we have to be clever about like keeping all the languages in the mix in each of the batch. If we organize the training corpus by language pairs, so that we first train on one language pair and then go to another language pair, that would be transfer learning and not this multitask training. This multitask training needs to refresh the knowledge of all the languages within every batch. Then you have to somehow make sure that you handle the disproportion of language sizes of training corpus size as well. If one of the language pairs was like too big compared to the others, then the other languages would be already overfit, and this big language pair would be still not fully employed in the training. So there is some things that you have to consider when training is set up. But the main result is that you have a fixed set of parameters. Into the model of the same size, you are now fitting more languages at once. So you are getting the hardware savings right away without any loss of it. So let's look at the results. It must not make things worse. This is a Google experiment from 2016, and this multilingual system includes many languages at once, or maybe just two in these setups. And when the translation goes from different languages into English, then there is always some improvement. So we did get the hardware cost saving. We have one model for two languages now. and so it saves half the disk size, and it can translate into English. So this to English token appears there all the time. It can translate from two languages at once, and it actually benefits from the other language in the mix a little because the transport into English are now better. But when we do the other direction, when we try to create this multilingual system to actually produce the non-English, the non-common language in the setup, then sometimes it helps, and sometimes it significantly decreases the performance. So, for example, having English-German training data mixed in into the English-French translation, that will give you a big loss because it will probably learn the German word order and it will try to produce it in French as well, and that's a bad idea. And it's also related to the oversampling, the sizes, the mutual sizes of the corpora. So the French and German were of different sizes, and either you preserve the original distribution, or you could skew it so that they are on par, and in each of the cases you get a loss in one of the languages. Yeah. So these experiments are not very promising. Like, you can feed multiple target language. You can feed multiple source languages in the same model, as long as the target is the same. You are not losing translation quality. But if you are feeding language pairs which have different targets into the same model, then in some of these targets you are probably getting a loss. But there is still this first token of the input sentence, and that token indicates which language do we want to translate into. And it's interesting to look at this token, because this token receives the standard embedding as other words receive. So we can use this token to look at the language level embedding. And this is what Jörg Tillman did in 2018 with this recurrent neural network system. It was trained to translate Bible in close to 1,000 languages, so 900 languages, but just the Bible. So the data set is very limited, but it's many different English translations of the Bible, so the English is not so poor, but still it's just one book. So this system was trained on the combinations of each of these languages with English, and then Jörg looked at the embeddings of that language flag, and the interesting and good thing is that indeed the embedding, when projected to a two-dimensional vector space with t-SNE, indicates the families. So the Indo-European languages form kind of a cluster, and they are close to, and I don't know whether this is probably the Niger Congo languages. Then Austronesian languages are across the board, France, New Guinea. So and then Afro-Asiatic Asian, Creole languages are here similar to the Indo-Europeans. In some of them, Quechua languages form a distinct cluster. So the language families are empirically identified, and they emerge. This heavily multilingual system does not translate very well, but it still is able to cluster languages in an unsupervised way, in a similar way that linguists cluster languages. So let's now move to the last bar, and this is very recent research done by Google, and you will see why only Google can, or not many companies, and not many institutions can do experiments like this. we are trying to really make the multilingual systems work, and we're trying to make them work for many languages at once. So this is something which has so far failed. Even 2 languages in the mix, and they were high resource, in fact, they didn't get any improvement. So the only improvements that we got were always for low resource languages by using the data for high resource languages. So this is the distribution that Orhan Ferhat from Google and colleagues experimented with. They have parallel corpora for 102 languages, and this is the data sizes. Sometimes you have billions of word pairs. Sometimes you have just dozens of thousands of sentence pairs. So this is the distribution that you get for languages which are already well represented in the digital domain, and there are even languages which are much less represented. And if you look at the translation quality baselines, I don't know how exactly they measured this, because this is the blast scores are not comparable across languages, so there should be probably some human judgments behind this. The natural thing to expect, and the natural thing that we really see, is that the translation quality is better for the higher source languages than for the lower source languages. This is the transformer setup. We have discussed that 2 weeks ago in quite some detail, and as a reminder, the transformer setup is an encoder-decoder sequence-to-sequence system, where the encoder consists of n layers, and normally there are 6 of these, like 16 encoder layers, and each of these encoder layers has 2 sublayers. First is the multi-head attention, in which there are multiple scalable products that provide multiple views on the previous layer outputs. So there is another constant. Here is one constant which says the number of layers, the depth of the network. Here is the number of heads in each of these layers. And there is also the feed-forward network, which like expands and then reduces the representation again. So here's some processing of the intermediate representation happening. So there is another constant, the size of the feed-forward network. And that's the encoder. So after a few layers of self-attention with the multiple heads, you arrive at the representation of the sentence at that position, and then you run the decoder, and the decoder has essentially the same structure, multiple layers, and you make the decoder consider itself, so it has the self-attention component, and it also has the encoder-decoder attention, so it again uses the multi-head attention to consider all the source sentence positions as they were prepared by the encoders. And then there is again the feed-forward network, which allows the decoder to improve the representation at that layer, and after, for example, 6 such layers, you will just scale it to the size of the vocabulary, and then you softmax to pick the current output word. So this is the model that performed pretty well in the single language first setups, and now the question is, how can we make use of this model in the multi-language setups? And the previous experiments that we have discussed so far were based on the recurrent neural networks, mainly on the recurrent neural networks, and they didn't really perform well for the high resource languages. So what the Google guys did is they increased the size of this transformer setup. So the default is to use just one GPU on which you can fit 6 layers of encoder and 6 layers of decoder, so 12 layers as such. Each of these layers is actually the multiple layers, the 2 sublayers of the encoder and 3 sublayers of the decoder. Then, by default, there's 8,000 vector elements in the feed-forward network, and the default is to use 16 heads. So in total, when you look at all the matrices that need to be trained, there's 400 million parameters to train. And this is the setup that performs very well across many languages, and this is the state of the art today. So what if we increase the depth? What if we use 12 layers in encoder, 12 in decoder, so 24 in total, and we also double the size of the dimension of the feed-forward network, and we double the size of the heads? Then we'll get to 1.3 billion parameters, and that would be a wide network, so to say, a wide transformer. And we will need definitely 2 GPUs to train it at the same time. And then you can use the same number of parameters, 1.3 billion, but organize them differently in the network structure. So the network can have smaller, or like the default breadth of the feed-forward network, and the default number of heads, 16 heads. But you can use double the number of layers. So that is a deep network. And to train this, you actually need to use 4 GPUs because of the different layout of the network structure. And there is other models. So the largest one discussed in this paper and based on the G-pipe setup, which allows to train these big networks by better parallelization across the multiple GPUs. The largest setup that they used was to have 64 layers in encoder and 64 layers in decoder, so 128 layers in total, with 32 heads and the bigger intermediate dimension, and that is 6 billion parameters. And as you will see, the deep setup, as you will see on the following slide, the deep setup will be better than the wide setup, especially on low resource languages. And that's probably because the network has more time to generalize and to construct some generic representation and then to produce the output based on that. But with these big networks, that many parameters, and despite having a huge corpus which consists of all the 100 languages paired with English, there are non-trivial things that you have to do in order to keep the training stable. Transformer model as such is already pretty unstable. That's why the learning rate is only gradually increased and then slowly decreased. And here you have to add further clippings of weights to avoid weights explosion and other problems. So here are the performances. This is on the x-axis. You will see the 100 languages, or 103 languages, and the baseline is all in the relative performance of the blast core. So we always train, Google always train, always train the pairwise system for that particular language and pair with English. That gave him some blast core, and then he trained the single model on the many languages at once, and it was a model of a particle size, transformer of particle size, and again he used the standard thing, the expert token, to identify the desired target language, and he compared the blast core of the multilingual system, given the baseline pairwise system blast core. And the languages are sorted according to the data sizes available for them. So this is the high resource languages, and this is the low resource languages. And this picture, which was trained for many many months, I would say, or extremely many GPUs, because it's 100 models for 100 languages, and then the multilingual model. This picture clearly confirms that it's the low resource languages that benefit from the multilingual setting. The high resource languages, if you use the normal transformer size, will actually suffer. So you can easily lose up to 5 bullet points by including the uninteresting low resource languages compared to the baseline. And now one has to very carefully think, like, until when is it better to use the separate pairwise models, and from when it is better to use the multilingual models, because at some point the languages become low resource compared to the average. Then we have the blue and yellow curves, and that is the deep and wide models, which are larger, first of all, than the baseline. So they are finally on par with the, or very close to the performance of the bilingual baselines, even for high resource languages, and they benefit more on the low resource setup. And then if you go for the extreme, which is the 6 billion parameters, then all this training data combined together, all the 103 languages paired with English, can or allow you to train this huge model, and you get an improvement in all the languages. You get like no loss on the high resource, and you get an improvement in the low resource setup. And here is last year's continuation of that experiment. Here we see again the bilingual baselines. And we see the massively multilingual model with the standard number of 400 million parameters. That is the standard transformer setup, and that hards on high resource languages. If you go to the 6 billion parameters, then you can avoid the loss of the high resource languages. And then if you do further tricks, and go up to 50 billion parameters, then you can get up to 5 bullet points even on the high resource language. So what are the tricks? These 50 billion parameters of transformer needed these sparsely gated mixtures of experts. So the idea is that this is an idea for the LSTM or some convolution setup. But the idea is that some parts of the network will be flexible and they will not be used all the time. But this mixture of experts layer will consist of a large pool of experts, and only a subset of them will be used for each particular input sample. And which expert to use would be something which the network will learn by itself again. So there will be this gating network. The gating network will observe what is the current input, and it will decide which of the experts should be used, which are most relevant for this input, and then these experts would operate on this input to get the output, and then we proceed. So this way, at each of the training runs, you have only a subset of the parameters loaded in, or you're operating only on this lower number of parameters, but the model as such includes all the other experts. And with a particular training regime and with random initialization, you are able to train parameters by training them only sometimes. It's up to the gating network to decide when which of the experts should be trained. So maybe some of these experts will be trained more often, and some of them will be trained less frequently. But still, the experts have the chance to divide the work among themselves. So maybe these experts are specialized for the particular languages in the model. That's something which maybe has not been analyzed yet. But the model as such can be much larger, reaching 50 billion parameters, and yet fit on the GPUs. So with this trick, with these 50 billion parameters, we got improvements, or at least some reduction of loss, and then even improvements, even on high resource languages. But it's important to realize that for 100 languages in the mix, there was English, we had to use the model which is 150 times larger. So the bottleneck is still there. If you try to put too many target languages, especially into one model, and you do not increase the model capacity, then it will lose performance on the high resource languages, which could be trained better when trained alone. The low resource languages would not use that capacity of that model anyway, because they don't have enough data for that. So for the low resource languages, putting more data in is useful, and that's the main message to remember. So there is in further work again by Orhan and colleagues. They try to again reduce the size, so you're using kind of special type of these experts. These experts are for the different languages, so they introduce a tunable sublayer. So most of the network is pre-trained on the big mixed corpus on the main languages, but then for every language separately, they perform fine-tuning of these small adapter layers. So most of the network remains the same, but throughout the network there are a few experts that are in a supervised way trained for the particular language parameters. And then at runtime you will have most of the network loaded, and you will load only these few additional numbers for the language pair at hand, and then the model will translate in an optimized way. So this is the performance of this smaller model. Again, this is the baseline size of the transformer setup, where the multilingual system is underperforming the bilingual baselines because the high resource languages do not fit into the capacity of the model. But with the adapters, the loss is reduced, and the performance of the low resource languages is retained. This is when translating into English. And this is when translating out of English. So here is the shared source and the different target, and here is the importance of the adapters more prominent. Yeah. So that's it for today. So today we have talked about using many more languages than the particular language pair of interest. We've started with transfer learning, where the language pair of interest, the child language, is your only goal, and you use the additional training data to somehow pre-train the model better. We have shown that neural MT systems can exploit this related data, and the key aspect was the size of the parent training data. If the parent was high resource, it helped. If the parent was low resource, it didn't help. And that holds true even for rather unrelated language pairs. We've tried to look into what is the benefit, where the benefit comes from, but I think that it probably is a better initialization. If you imagine the high number of parameters that even the standard transformer has, then like starting with these parameters in some sensible area where it already knows the sentences are of this length and not like infinite, it's a good knowledge. So pre-training on any language would have benefits. It puts the parameters to some good starting position, and that is something which we can always put as the explanation of the game. But it would be interesting to look more into the similarity of languages and the syntactic properties of those, and especially syntactic properties with respect to like how does the attention change when you are doing this transfer step and so on. So that was the transfer learning. And then we have talked about multi-source and multi-target and multilingual systems, obviously. So multilingual was whenever it could produce or digest more languages than just one pair, and multi-source and multi-target where the setups where you had more of these inputs at once and more of these outputs at once. So the goal would be some flexible setup which would digest whatever we have and produce whatever we want. Then we have discussed the early experiments by Johnson and others from Google, who have put all the data together and just added the language token label. And this language token label approach hit the capacity of the model problem, so you could not go any, like it did not perform in general better, except for the lower source setup and the shared target language, target English. But this language token specified target language had an interesting embedding that revealed language memories. And the model capacity as the bottleneck was finally removed by the recent experiments of Google, a three-year work in total, and with models that are 100 times larger. Yes, you can fit 100 times as many languages into the model, and you get benefits on even the higher source language pairs. And there is an ongoing work how to achieve this benefit across the board, across the large and lower source languages with some variants of mixtures of experts. Yeah, so that was it. I hope it was interesting, and I'm very curious what the results will be and whether we will get quite some time soon to models that handle many languages at once and still fit on one GPU and training, so that researchers at regular universities could also take part in these experiments. So thanks for attention.